right, ladies and gentlemen, it does appear that Prydwen has updated their tier list for Wuthering Waves once again, and this time it's for the latter half of version 2.0. And you know what came out in the latter half of 2.0? It's none other than Roccia, the latest sub DPS that buffs Havoc damage and basic attack damage best in slot, or some could say maybe not best in slot, for a character like Camellia. I've got my own opinions on her. I don't think she's that great of a pull, and I'm excited to see where Prydwen has decided to place her and what other changes they have in store for the tier list. So with that, let's go ahead and just get right on into it for the changelog. Roccia has been added, and now she's a tier 1. That is quite a bit below some of the other characters. Actually, one of the lowest on the entire hybrid slash sub DPS on the tier list. She's a specialist focused on buffing specifically Havoc basic attacks. This means Roccia, while strong, is dedicated to a few specific teams, the main ones being Camellias and Havoc Rovers. That is entirely true, ladies and gentlemen. She is not extremely versatile. If you're using her to buff a basic attack character that doesn't deal Havoc damage like Encore, well, Sanhwa's gonna do a better job because Sanhwa literally will give better buffs in that situation. Unfortunately for Roccia, she faces stiff competition in both from S6 Sanhwa, who does a similar job but can also play within far more meta team compositions. I assume they're also meaning to put Dan Jin here as well. It looks like there's a bit of a typo because you're saying in both, but we're only referencing one character. I would amend this statement to also put in something about Dan Jin as well, who literally can provide bigger Havoc damage buffs, right? Dan Jin's outro skill gives a 23% amp. Roccia's gives a 20% amp, while also obviously having the offset of 25% basic attack damage amp on top of it. So I do think they meant to put her in there as well. I think they mean facing competition in both Camellia and Rover teams. Okay, well maybe I just read it wrong then. But yeah, I would mention something about Dan Jin in here as well, because she also gives pretty competitive buffs, especially if the character is like Havoc Rover and they do split damage types. As a result of this competition, right, and the limited use cases, Roccia lands herself in tier 1 for now. With that said, it's worth noting Roccia is an AoE gathering monster. Endgame is currently very single target focused, but in the future might very well change. When that happens, Roccia is likely to ascend the tiers as she gains an edge over her competitors. That is entirely true. She is one of the best groupers in the game. She's probably the best grouper in the game. Her grouping is on some of the lowest cooldowns I've ever seen. It probably is the lowest cooldown, and she can persist that grouping over into her on-field main DPS through the gadget, the magic box that she unlocks with her second inherent skill. And so I would imagine, right, people probably are going to be like, okay, this character is a little weak, especially in single target situations. She's not fully realizing any of her abilities. You're going to notice in the tower right now, against single targets or elites, well, her magic box doesn't fucking do anything. It does 100 damage. It straight up just does 100 damage and groups enemies, but against bosses, it doesn't group. So all it does is 100 damage. And you know how much HP the bosses have, you know, like over 1 million. That's literally non-existent. You might as well not even cast it. It's probably going to distract you more to actually use the ability in combat and maybe make you miss a dodge or something. So a lot of times in my clears currently, I don't even use the ability. Next up, we've got Yang Yang. Yang Yang has seen a substantial increase in use recently, thanks to the addition of Carlotta, who she's proven to perform strongly with, being one of the best free-to-play options for her. Yes, I have pushed Yang Yang with Carlotta since the release of the character, because guess what? Carlotta is one of the most resonance liberation reliant characters in the game, alongside characters like Zhang Liao. And if those characters don't have the resonance liberation, oh boy, their rotations are clunky. They run out from outro buffs, and they just don't feel very good to play, especially Zhang Liao and Carlotta without their liberation. And she also has some quick swap potential as well, especially with Zhang Liao, even when she's being used as a sub DPS, based off of the fact that, well, her outro buff, she doesn't really have one. And that means that there's nothing to lose to swap to her in the middle of the rotations. Same with Chang Li too. And because of that, she works with some of the highest meta characters. Zhang Liao, Chang Li, and Carlotta, they're at the top of the meta in their respective categories. And so that has earned her an increase in rating. I am perfectly on board with it. Maybe she could be tier 1. Maybe she could be tier 1. Next up, we've got Mortifi, and bro has been nerfed. Not really, he hasn't really been. He's going down from tier 0.5, which was like the second best, all the way down to tier 1 to kind of populate that category with Roccia. Mortifi has been at the top of our tier list since 1.0, and for a good reason. When combined with Jian, he formed the backbone of one of the strongest teams, which still stands today. Absolutely true. Any person that's talking about power creep in the Wuthering Waves, talking about how, the 1.0 characters aren't good, Gian anymore, they're talking out of their ass and they don't actually play the fucking game. Because Gian and Mortefi, with any support, right, that's Verena or Shorekeeper, is still one of the best teams in the game. It absolutely demolishes content. To this day, it works against single target. It has some of the best performance in multi-target and AoE, and it makes Gian and Mortefi, by proxy, one of the most versatile teams you could ever use in the tower. There's only one boss in the game currently that is arrow resistant. That means that Gian basically has a use case against every other boss in the game. That actually makes him probably one of the best possible picks. Camellia, on the other hand, or Jinxie, they have multiple bosses that are resistant to their attribute. Camellia has bosses like the Impermanence Heron. She has bosses like Scar. She has bosses like Crownless that she can't really deal damage to. On the other hand, Jinxie has bosses like the Fallacy, the Ikes, and Scar as well, because Scar is resistant to Spectro and Havoc at the same time. So with that in mind, a character like Gian or a character like Carlotta, right, where Carlotta hasn't even had a glacial resistant boss ever in the tower, they're viable in basically almost every situation. And it makes them very easy to use, it makes them very strong, and obviously the only thing that they have to watch out for are elites, because their bosses don't show up very often that are kind of like their worst enemies. So that's my Gian shilling for the week. So going back to Mortefi, however, with so many diverse damage dealers and more meta viable teams than ever, Mortefi still only works at the highest levels with Gian. For this reason, we're lowering his tier for now. So the main reason, and kind of like the only reason why they're bumping him down, isn't because of his strength, isn't because of his performance, isn't because of his damage. It's because he kind of only works with one character in the game at the high level. And I'm gonna be honest, that's pretty fair. He has fast concerto, he has smooth rotations, a lot of personal damage, but let's be honest, there's only one real heavy attack made DPS on the roster, and that is Gian. There aren't really any other limited DPSs that do a lot of damage through heavy attacks. And that sort of means that, like, hey, he's only working with one team, and if we're digging down Roccia for a lack of versatility, we're digging down Mortefi as well. I think it's fair. It makes a ton of sense to me. We're not wrong about anything here. And in my opinion, a lack of versatility, right? A lack of viable team comps is something that should be factored into a character's strength. Because if I'm able to invest in one character, put in the resources into their skills, their level, their echoes, right? All of those substats, all of those tuners, all of those tubes that we're using on them, and I'm only able to use them in one team, well, that's not a very good use of resources. Yeah, this character's Roccia is not a very good use of your resources. And that, hopefully, right, more heavy attackers, that should be soon for Mortefi. Last change, they're adding the multi-role tag to Changli. Added to better reflect her preferable playstyle with more casual players who aren't necessarily going to quick swap often. Thank God, because my goodness, if you've seen the quick swap gameplay that I and many other creators have participated in and done, it's a little complicated. It's a little hard. It's a little difficult. It requires a lot of retries, a lot of resets, a lot of muscle memory, and a lot of like understanding of some pretty complex, nuanced rotations that like aren't really required in any other team or gameplay. It's like playing a little bit of a different game in a lot of ways. Love all of the changes. Everything makes sense to me. Let's dive into then the elephant in the room. So to kind of visualize what that changelog was looking like, my oh my, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, it's not looking too good here, is it? It's not looking too good here. By everything we're seeing here, Roccia on this tier list is actually the worst limited 5-star unit in the game. She is the worst limited 5-star unit in the game from a value perspective, from a strength perspective, blah, blah, blah. And I'm gonna be honest, maybe she could have gone in tier 0.5 based off of her buffs alone, but she has a lot of things holding her back. A lot of things holding her back. I've talked about it before. She has incredible investment issues where you need really, really, really good rolls on your substats, on your echoes to make her work. She has the cost of being a limited character, and she also has the big downside, right, of having Sanhua as her adjacent 4-star option. And Sanhua, ladies and gentlemen, is probably a little bit broken. She's probably a little bit too broken because of the fact that A, this character has almost no rotation time, insane concerto energy, a little bit of personal damage if you do decide to build her, but Sanhua also works with no investment at all. Just stick an overture on her in a Moonlit Cloud set with no substats on it, and you'll have enough ER to ult every single rotation. You actually don't need to even invest in her at all to make her a buffer. And ladies and gentlemen, being cheap is a good thing. And Sanhua gets it done without a lot of need to, really grind for echoes and, spend all of the tuners and tubes that you'll be using on an expensive person like Roccia to actually get them up and running. She's fucking ridiculous. I spent probably more tubes and tuners on this character just to get her to 70% crit rate than than I ever have in my goddamn life on any other character. And it felt terrible. Like, I was recycling echoes and digging through my inventory like a fucking crack addict looking for a fix. It was so hard to get this character up and running. I almost didn't want to do it, but I did. She works okay. She does a decent amount of damage. She has good grouping, but my oh my, there are some issues with her. We've seen all the rankings. We've seen where stuff is shifting. It's really only in the hybrid category. That's where all the changes were. We don't really need to comment on where the DPS categories have shifted. Let's go ahead. Let's get into the review for this character. Pros: powerful buffing potential for having basic attack DPS characters. Great personal damage. True. Super easy to play and get the hang of. Also true. Has the best grouping abilities in the game thanks to her resonance skill and unique inherent ability. Also true. And has the cutest pet known to mankind. I think WuWa is cuter, actually, and Jinxie summons WuWa all the time. Cons: competes with two amazing hybrids, Sanhua and Danjin. True. The former not only being top tier, but also accessible to free-to-play. I think they're both accessible to free-to-play, to be honest, from the perspective of you get Sanhua for free, but Sanhua only really competes with Roccia's buffs when Sanhua's S6. And so, yeah, Sanhua is free, but also needs to be S6 to really be a super competitive option. But Sanhua's been on so many banners at this point, it's very likely that you will have her S6. Requires more stat investment than most other hybrids to unlock her full potential. I just talked about that earlier. My oh my, this character needs to be built like a freaking ridiculous amount to actually work. You want more than 120% ER. I would say 125 is a comfy point. That's hard to get. You want 70% crit rate, and that's hard to get because the character has no critical rate on her skill tree. I'm just gonna pull up the game because it pisses me off that much. This character requires you to have 70% crit rate to access this buff of 200 attack. She also proceeds to have critical damage on her fucking skill tree. It's like whoever designed this character actually wanted you to suffer. Why not just make it critical rate? Why not? It's so hard to build her. It's ridiculous. Guess what? You're either gonna be using a crit rate 4 cost on her and then completely neuter her damage potential, or if you're gonna run crit damage with a 5-star weapon that gives crit rate Verity's Handle, you could summon her signature. It's exactly the same base stats. Look at what you need on the substat side. 6.9, actually low. 9.3, that's fucking high. 10.5, oh yeah, that's high. 7.5, hey, it's middle of the road. And 9.3, and guess what my stats are? 72.8. I'm at 72.8 with that crazy investment. I am almost off. If I miss a single crit rate roll, I'm not there. I have 3 pieces above 9%. 3 pieces above 9%, and I'm barely there. This character is an absolute fucking nightmare to build. I'm just going to be honest about that, ladies and gentlemen. You have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, oh boy, you're going to be in for a world of suffering as you try to get through this character's echo grind. And like I mentioned before, Sanhua is free. She's free, and she requires much less investment to function and give her buffs. You just need her sequence nodes. For this character, holy shit, you're gonna have to grind. So with that, looking at the review, Roccia is a 5-star having gauntlet character whose main utility is empowering blah blah blah. Every element of her kit is used for imagination. Yeah, you basically just build up her forte circuit, you get into the air using her resonance skill, and then you start slamming. Her S1 allows her to skip. I've been doing rotations where I build up a single forte stack before even introing in onto her, so I can just skip right into the resonance skill. If you use a basic attack right after her intro skill, you immediately go into her basic attack 4 that generates its own extra imagination stack. That is something that is actually not too much of a slowdown in your rotation time, but for characters like Shorekeeper, right? I do that in the rotation for Shorekeeper specifically because at S0, Shorekeeper's Stellar Realm and her Ultra buff only lasts 30 seconds. And so I'm trying to maximize the duration of buffs like the Fallacy of No Return by priming up that forte stack before we're getting into the rotation. I would have maybe put that alternative rotation in here to account for that, because for a character like Camellia, right? We all know how Camellia works, ladies and gentlemen. For a character like Camellia, oh boy, sometimes that Stellar Rail can run out. Sometimes that Fallacy of No Return Echo skill runs out as well. And you want those buffs on Camellia longer as opposed to having them on Roccia. I think it's safe to say that, because Camellia or Havoc Rover in these lineups is doing a lot more damage than Roccia is. 1,000,000%. So with that, I would have maybe put that alternative rotation in here. It is a little bit slower in a sense, but maximizes the duration of buffs on the main DPS. And, you know, since you're Shorekeeper and stuff, you can cancel some of her abilities. Same with Verena. You're going to be able to, you know, kind of weave in and save some time that way. So I would have maybe put in that rotation as well in the review, especially if you're pairing her with a character like Shorekeeper. Your actions as Camellia on the field, especially if you get hit like a couple of times, oh yeah, you could lose access to discernment from taking too long. But with that, it's a very fair guide. It's a very fair review review. And I think the main point over here, right, is that Sanhua at S6 especially is a fine alternative. And most people probably have Sanhua at S6 by now because she's been on a shit ton of banners. And that, ladies and gentlemen, means, well, this character might not be the best pick ever. She might not be the best pick ever. It happens. But it is safe to say that Wuthering Waves, we might have needed a dud. We might have needed a 5-star limited dud because every single character so far, well, depending on how you feel about Changli and how much you're willing to sweat, they've been really good. They've been really strong. And they've been, you know, in a sense, a lot could argue that many of these characters, except maybe like these two, are like must pulls and they provide a ton of value. Her, on the other hand, she's probably the easiest skip in gacha gaming. So keep that in mind as you know, you're going throughout the patch, you're looking ahead to characters like Phoebe and Brant. She might not be worth it for you depending on where you stand in the game. So with that, I think this was again a very fair tier list update. No updates at all except in the hybrid category. And just wanted to do a deep dive on Roccia to explain some of that placement, considering that I have had experience actually using the character. Peace out.